finger at them, yeah.
All right, Senate Education Committee, April 7th, we're back after a short break.
This is all you got?
And we are
The other guy.
Dave's on.
taking up H 930, and we did a walkthrough,
Oh,
but well, that's happened to us a few times.
okay,
We just, our schedule has worked
okay.
such that I gotta get up like Bill. But anyway, and we had the sponsor here for the introduction and what's really going on with, or why the bill is necessary and why you did it,
Yeah,
what's going on in the bill. So you're on.
okay, Rob Hunter, House Education Committee, and this is actually an AOE bill that came to us that we found pretty easy to support. I mean, I wrote a little bit here. You want me to just read it and yell at you with my wonderful prose? Here's the sad story.
Oh, by the way, introduce yourself.
Yes, Rob Hunter, House Education.
I don't do sad stories.
Here's the sad story. So, this was my first bill introduction in the 2 years. And so my bag was getting really just full of stuff. And so a couple of days after I gave my floor report, I'm like, I don't need this stuff anymore. And then the very next day, over the weekend, I get a note from your committee person saying, hey, could you introduce that bill? I'm like, oh, yeah, I threw away all my notes. So we wrote this special for you guys. Okay. So since the coronavirus pandemic, chronic absenteeism in Vermont and the United States has risen dramatically. Prior to the pandemic, chronic absenteeism was at about 15% nationally. Okay, also reflected in Vermont. After the pandemic, that percentage rose to close to 30% the years following the pandemic. In Vermont, after a peak of 30%, chronic absenteeism still hovers close to 25%. We know that the effects of absenteeism is not just for the individual and their loss of learning and connection to the school community, but large swaths of students missing from school affects the entire school community. We know the more years a student is chronically absent in the early years, the more at risk they are for needing reading interventions by the end of second grade. In fact, research shows when assessing significant test score declines nationwide from pre to post-pandemic, the U.S. Council of Economic Advisors quantified in 2023 that absenteeism explains 16% to 45% of the declines in test scores on the NAEP.
That's actually really interesting.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a really interesting. We've been wondering, we've been trying to explore a little bit why some of this is happening. And that's an articulation we hadn't heard.
Yeah.
So
other obvious impacts of chronic absenteeism is on high school graduation. By the end of high school, regular attendance is a better predictor of graduation than test scores. A student who's chronically absent any year between grades 8 and 12 is more than 7 times more likely to drop out than their peer who is not chronically absent. H 930 represents, here it is, H 930 represents a shift in mindset. Where we all may understand the need for truant officers in the past, research has shown that punitive measures like fines and court appearances are not effective in getting children back to school. Especially, when you consider the numbers that have so dramatically climbed, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. A situation this critical has forced examination of the problem and how best to solve it. There's a myriad of reasons for the dramatic increase in absenteeism, and those reasons vary from in-school situations like bullying to out-of-school reasons, including chronic health conditions, to lack of reliable transportation. And those health issues might not even be the kid, it might be a parent, that they're taking care of, or taking care of a sibling. And it's not as simple as it's just one thing, it's a lot of different things.
but all of those things were there, not to interrupt, but all of those things were there before the pandemic.
Yeah,
Let's talk about
so there's something changed. And I mean, and I can even tell you, my last couple of years teaching were, through the pandemic and then up to 2023. And it even, it was obvious that certain kids were just missing a lot of days, and things back in Manchester actually, pretty good. We do a real good job with kids. And, but it's across the state, it's a big deal. It's a real big deal.
Well, even employment.
Oh, and I don't know. I mean, right. I've talked to business owners who just have trouble getting people coming in. So I'm not sure Well, yeah, so anyway, so the AOE has put forth a bill that is ambitious in its paradigm shift to better get at the root of students' chronic absenteeism rather than the old school way of dealing with it. This bill outlines state level strategies which decenter compliance as the primary outcome and more deeply considers the root causes behind absenteeism and the impact of absenteeism on communities rather than individuals. Also important in this bill is the establishment of definitions that can vary from school to school, namely what is an excusable absence versus a non-excusable absence. In this way, clear language and clear procedures will help all Vermont school systems be consistent in how they deal with students and parents. The bill calls for a collaborative approach, developing a model policy that includes all the major stakeholders in the state, right? All the fees, the independent schools, everybody else. The bill does not completely remove truant officers or the possibility of prosecution for those parents, guardians who refuse to comply with state law. Rather, that process is more well-defined and consistent, and it should be noted, serves more as a last resort rather than this is how we deal with it. So our committee voted this out 11-0, passed the floor pretty easily. It's it is an issue that needs, frankly, some serious attention, and I think that this bill will give it that attention.
So what does it actually do? Or to status quo?
Okay, so really, as I said, it represents a paradigm shift, and the focus is going to be more on interventions with individuals, right? Phone calls, people showing up, hey, how come you weren't in school? That sort of thing, like reaching out rather than, immediately sending the truant officer, that sort of thing. But what this law will do is get everybody in the state, in every school, on the same page, same definitions. What is truancy? What is chronic absenteeism? Right? How many days would be considered?
So at this current time, we have 119 different districts and we have
Might be 100.
19 different ways of handling
Yeah.
truancy.
Yeah, no, and actually there was a kind of a cool moment here when we were talking about, they wanted to put in sort of a list of things that were excusable and not excusable. And then I think when we debated about the superintendent shall or may, right, that it was a shall or may situation, determine whether these things were excusable. And I realized it needs to be a may, because let's say you get this kid who's going on their 50th college visit, right? And, it happened. I mean, maybe not 50, but maybe 25. And, no, you've already been out the door 20 times. I think that's, this one is going to be not excused, right? So that sort of thing. Yeah, and I think that the definition of being chronic absent is like 20 missed days or 10% or something. But what I like most about this is the kinder, gentler approach. Like, let's get all hands on deck here and let's realize that we're dealing with a serious problem in our state.
So the real place it also is the roads, the model policy, and then the schools each have.
Exactly, right. So, and as I said, all the stakeholders will come together, create a model policy, and then by such and such a date, schools will be required to adopt this policy or come up with their own. Yeah.
I was saying to Representative Hunter that I'm nodding along and sort of, I had this conversation, I would say in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know that we were out of the woods, but we were really looking at absenteeism. And it was our state's attorney's office in Chittenden County that approached us about decriminalizing family truancy. So, I don't know if we ever ended up putting anything in law, honestly, but it's, the upshot for this part of the conversation is that the courts are also involved in what's considered truancy. And at least in Chittenden County, they had a working group do a study with all their districts of what their policies are so that they could streamline it by county, because ultimately if there's a big problem, it goes to their county court. And then they wanted to make sure they weren't they didn't have huge disparate experiences with how many kids or families, parents essentially were getting called in for truancy hearings in court.
Yeah, and they could be fined, up to $1,000. And and I mean, one of these out of school reasons is, the people who are kind of not housed straight, and it's kind of mind boggling to think that these people are going to get hauled into court, and possibly fined. So I think what this law is attempting to do, or will do, is make the process much more holistic, much more humanistic, and get kids back in school, because that is ultimately the most important thing, right? School is a lot of things. It's, to even push it a little bit further, think about the different supports that kids get in schools, right? And maybe it's a counselor, maybe it's a nurse, maybe it's a trusted adult. I mean, there's a lot besides the read, write, and predict, right? And it's a lot.
Yeah, it's policy, is the bill, like we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So did you hear anything about, do the rates of truancy increase with age? Or is it, or another way?
Boy, that's a good question.
Are there a lot, are we experiencing a lot of truancy at the very young ages?
What's really interesting
I
is that
never really thought about that.
you got little kids missing a
Mhm.
lot of school.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that's even more critical, but I don't know that it's any more critical. It's just different. But think of all the foundational stuff that little kids are learning. They're learning their alphabet. They're learning their numbers. They're beginning phonics, right? They're learning that TH sounds like this and PH sounds like this. And as the statistics show, those little kids that are missing a lot of school, but by the end of second grade, they could be,
Right.
back in the dark ages, right? Compared to their peers who show up every day.
The data tends to have some intersection in early years with expulsion and suspension. So when I did the first bill to stop expelling kids under 8, which didn't pass the first year I introduced it. But when I introduced that bill, one of the studies that comes up pretty quickly when you look is that early childhood is where the most suspensions and expulsions happen. And it's largely because they get to have zero tolerance policies. They, in a seller's market, they could just be like, look, you're not picking your kid up on time, or you're not, and expel kids from the program that way.
It's a Manchester kid.
I know. Yeah, she was good.
Why was section 5 put in there? The home study, the home study program attendance requirement.
Right. Part of the bill, good. I forgot that. I think that they want to.
It's the very last section 5, just before it says.
It's just a lot of school now.
See, you were trying.
H section.
Yeah.
Well, that very left.
Page 12, 5, line 5.
Probably interesting. Sorry.
No.
So we get, so this, I think I mentioned this at the last, when we first got our walkthrough. So there was a lot of language for this. This is going back to 2024, so my memory might be wrong, but there was the language surrounding these home study program attendant requirements was changed, but there was a section taken out regarding a hearing if there's an issue with essentially a child not getting a home study, even if they're signed up for it. But the language for the hearings was taken out, and I think that was inadvertent. And then it was put back into the miscellaneous education bill in 2024. We came back for a veto session on June 17th, and that was the last calendar that existed for that biennium. And the bill wasn't moved on. And so the language that puts the home study hearing process back into law never passed. So I'm gonna, keep recommending that we don't put this to a study because we already have the language for it, and just put it back into law because the
Okay.
miscellaneous bill died.
Yeah, I remember the conversation now about that, and it was just, they just kind of wanted to know a little bit more. And this kind of is dovetailing in my mind with another conversation. I think it was somebody from DCF. They were in and I think it was even attached to this, one of their frustrations is if they have a situation with a kid, where, they feel that maybe things at home aren't good, and the parent pulls the kid and says, well, now I'm gonna homeschool to just stop any kind of investigation, to stop any kind of forward progress on helping this kid. But I think that people also want some checks and balances for the homeschool folks, right? That was that piece that you were talking about? Yeah, so, and I don't know if that happens a lot, but it happens to the point of frustration, I think, for those professionals who are trying to help kids who might be in trouble. And then suddenly a parent pulls them and says, well, we're gonna homeschool this.
Homeschool person.
Yeah, that's me,
Uh,
being quiet.
okay, yeah, thank you. That was.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was,
Thanks for having me.
that was good. That you came to job.
Okay.
First bill.
So that.
Yeah, we're going to.
Thank you. I wouldn't go that far.
Have a good day.
See you guys. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, but we have Courtney O'Brien.
Oh, and my colleague, Ian Bill.
Oh, you're together. Okay.
We are together,
Okay.
yes. Would you like? No, you can take it. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. I was playing tricks on house education because I attended an earlier testimony virtually up at the office and in between scurried down here. So had a little fun for that today. Who's like to start?
Yeah, for the record.
Okay, for the record, I am Courtney O'Brien. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Agency of Education's Director for Safe and Healthy Schools.
Jamie Cravo, also use she, her pronouns. I'm Assistant Attorney General for the Agency of Education. Just want to be clear, I'm here for the Agency of Education, not for the Attorney General.
Thank you, Andy. So we have prepared written testimony today to discuss the bill. I know you've also certainly just heard some recent testimony as well from House Education. Before I jump in,
We've gone through, done a walkthrough.
you've done a walkthrough. Was just going to offer a quick run through of what I'd like to talk about today, and then certainly if you'd like us to adjust, we can go in any direction you need. I'll reiterate a couple of the key points that I think you've just heard about why this bill is important and what it offers us in both short and long-term impacts for Vermont. I'll talk about the agency's strategic plan around this, which includes not just the updates to statute, but some additional work that's been happening in parallel. And then of note, since the introduction of this bill to House Education, there were several amendments and adjustments that were introduced. For the most part, we are very much in agreement with these, but there are a couple of those new provisions that we'd like to discuss and offer alternatives to. Is there anything additional that you'd like to talk about today?
No, let's start with what you have.
Okay, yeah, short list, right? Excellent. So again, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to come back and talk about this bill. The attention and the conversation and the enthusiasm for this bill from both committees has been much appreciated. And I think it really shows that this bill is offering a very practical solution to a pervasive problem here in Vermont. We also want to recognize that chronic absenteeism is impacted by a number of root causes that exist both within school systems and outside of school systems. And so while this is one very critical piece of this work, managing and resolving chronic absenteeism for Vermont is not a solution that can only be provided by the school system. So I think that's very important to keep reiterating that this needs to be a all-state commitment. Nationally, we are seeing other states that are jumping into this work in similar ways. And what we're seeing in the places that have been successful in their efforts are unified, multi-agency, community level commitment to addressing chronic absenteeism, not a task that is assigned only to the education system. So we want to make sure we're being clear on that as we move through. The agency's strategy for how we do support the education system's role in this work begins with these updates to Title 16. So I really appreciate the question, why this bill, why now? What is this really meant to do?
in a lot of ways, this is the first domino to fall in that paradigm shift that's being discussed. So we have a need to create definitions and consistency around what is chronic absenteeism, not just in how we manage that through model policy and model procedures, but the term chronic absenteeism does not exist in our statutes, and it does not exist as a federal requirement. So it's a federal construct that is talked about and that we do offer some data and reporting on, but it is not something that is codified in the same way that we are introducing in this language here. Consistency is a really important part of this process. So as you've just heard, there's extreme variance in how we are managing currently let's all call it truancy, but how we're managing absenteeism and attendance across the state. And so this bill introduces the really needed foundations for what are we talking about, how are we measuring, and creating those minimum standards for this across the state. That consistency is important, not just in the early intervention. Certainly that's a huge part of this work, but all the way through that continuum into truancy, which does still exist as a tool in this new, in the statute, right? So it's the kind of most intensive intervention that's needed. But the consistency then creates an expectation that by the time a truancy case is referred to the state's attorney's office, there are minimum standards on what is documented, what intervention has happened, what supports have been provided to a family, and it creates a more streamlined course for the state's attorneys who are working on these cases at that level. Okay. Beyond Title 16, as we talked about, Title 16 would introduce the requirement of a model policy that would be maintained by the agency in collaboration with our partners in education. And also across state agencies. So because of the places where education law intersects with the child protection law and with Agency of Human Services law, we have been and would continue to be working very closely with our partners at DCF in particular to make sure that model policies are in alignment with other places in state law where this process is discussed. So we've been working through that. We engaged over the last 2-ish years in some pretty in-depth shareholder engagement and feedback around what's working, what's not. A lot of the same things that you've already heard came to light in those conversations, including from the state's attorneys and sheriff's office. So we were able to get some insight from them as well around what's happening when you have a case referred to you and what are you seeing as success. Again, really heard loud and clear that the variance across the state is becoming a barrier or has been a barrier in that space. So the model policy would establish consistent definitions, data practices, which are very important in our ability to measure, understand, and then continue to make improvements around attendance, and evidence-based intervention frameworks, while also preserving local control. So the intent of a model policy would not be to be so prescriptive that it's a how-to step-by-step guidebook for school districts. It's really thinking about what are those minimum standards of intervention, where do we have a must versus a should in a best practice, and establishing that consistent baseline across the state. Further, beyond model policy development, that absolutely needs to be and would be supported by additional risk resources. So that would be a model procedures document, which is more about that. How do we, in a school system, it's very educator focused. I often talk about that as the guidebook or the playbook for these different processes. This would also need to be supported by technical resources and assistance, things like template letters and being able to elevate or spotlight parts of the state that have already approached this work and are seeing some success. Chittenden County is an example that comes to mind. There's a coalition that's working specifically in attendance right now, and they've made some really great improvements. And so thinking about how do we uplift those processes that work well and still allow for space to individualize or adjust those approaches in other parts of the state that are perhaps more resource challenged or have different setup available to them.
Who could we have it? You said you talked about districts that's doing this and making some progress.
So
Interesting to have them in.
Chittenden County has a number of districts that are working together, and I believe they're being led by a representative from the Howard Center. Kara Gleason-Krebs is our contact there. I'd be happy to facilitate an introduction.
Yes, touch.
Yep, absolutely.
By email.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yes, and so no, that's quite all right. I think where we're starting to land on here is that this is not a one and done solution. Again, we really talk about this as step one, which builds the strong foundation. In the education space, this will be met with technical assistance, Again, things like office hours or collaborations, or how do we uplift or spotlight the places where this is working. This is a multi-year ongoing project. In addition to that, what we would then expect is that over the next couple of years after this foundation is set and we've kind of created some norms around this process, there are other state agencies and community partners that would then need to come to the table and be thinking about root causes and potential solutions in their own space, right? So if we think about things like in-school causes, which may link to student engagement, which may link to harassment, hazing, and bullying, which may link to having access to a high-quality teacher, those are things that education would be focusing on after we've set this foundation. Things like transportation or housing availability or different rural challenges, those are all things that would need to be brought forth by other agencies. And so far, we are seeing some general support from many of our partners in that space. Okay, so before I shift into the specific provisions that we wanted to talk about, are there any questions about the larger strategy? Okay, so in the latest iteration of this, I'll just go through the different sections, and I think Jamie, you may have had the policy up, so I don't have the specific line and section up. I have just kind of topic and content to talk through. The first is the addition of specific provisions for how to address the absence of a child with disability in accordance with state and federal law. Very much in agreement with this in concept. These protections are already provided in both state and federal law in other places. And so our suggestion is that that may not be most beneficial to include in the statute here, where we will then potentially create confusion or duplicative requirement around that.
Exactly where are we?
That's on page 6, line 4 of the current bill.
And so your suggestion would be what?
The suggestion would be to strike this section from the statute and then reiterate and reinforce in model procedure and protocols.
You say this section, did you mean?
I would say from line 3 to most of line 5. Just to reiterate, sorry. I say most of line 5 up until comment here.
Page 6.
On page 6, yes, sorry, I misread.
Page 6, line 3 through 5.
Yes, which shall include specific provision for how to address the absence of a child with a disability, etc.
And you have verbiage that you prefer to put in there,
I think we would just recommend striking
Striking
that.
starting where and finishing where.
Starting with which, and finishing with comma and.
And again, reiterating, the intent here is not to strike that protection. It is reinforced in multiple other places in both state and federal law. And so again, just making sure that we have clarity of where these definitions and requirements exist rather than creating a duplicative section of requirement.
So this is just cutting down on redundancy, you think?
I think so, yes.
I think it's both cutting down on redundancy and also, policy is really a high level look. That was something passed by a school board. And when you get down to procedures, which are something we would also put out there, or a best practices document, we can delve more into supporting children with disabilities with respect to attendance and those. But having specific provisions in a policy makes it less possible to be responsive to needs, and it also could be distracting to the main goal of addressing them.
So are you, just to be really clear, are you actually talking about starting on line 4, with the words as that term is defined?
No,
Start on line 3, at which shall.
which shall include specific provisions for how to address the absence of a child. with
So you get rid of the whole clause, okay?
Yeah, the whole clause.
And all the way down through,
After federal law, there's a comma.
After federal law, there's
Okay.
comma and,
okay,
so we could go to,
Get rid of and as well.
yeah, so then it would read a model policy on the prevention of chronic absenteeism and truancy, which shall include guidance that emphasizes the importance of tailored responses.
okay, got it. just understand what you're looking for. Yep.
Thank you. There are two additions that reference different needs around hazing, harassment, and bullying. And so may I ask you to help
Sure,
find
the-
those lines?
First is on page page 5, line 5. And we would recommend cutting number 12, incidents of hazing, harassment, policy.
And why is that?
Yeah, so looking back to my notes here, this specific inclusion as a standalone category of excused absences, we think, one is not clear, so we're not really sure what we're talking about around incidents regarding HHB. The nature of an HHB incident on a child could be short-term, long-term impact. There's not a lot of definition there around what we're talking about. There's already a line in here around students who may need to be excused for health or mental health needs. And so we would expect that if this child is experiencing some sort of mental health disruption as a result of an HHB incident, that they would be able to utilize that option there instead. I think I have the second part of this is around HHB data collection, but the reasoning I think applies to both.
Can I jump in here?
Please.
As well? You know, the other excusal reasons are also events in the outside world that are having impact on a student's ability to attend school. This one stands separate from those because there's really something that is happening within the school and that the school has control over. And frankly, that the school has tools that they should be considering using. They can put in place safety plans, they can put in place counseling for students. They have a lot of tools at the ready. And I think we also have a concern that putting an excused absence in here may have the inadvertent consequence of telling schools and families that this is the best way to protect your child when there's other tools at the ready to protect their children from harassment that schools should be using as sort of a frontline mechanism. And then in addition to that, it's not as if the student is really having a serious mental health or physical reaction to harassment, hazing, or bullying. There are other ways to have the excuse from school. We just don't want that inadvertent consequence or messaging, given the importance of school attendance.
So that's interesting, actually, because what you're saying is that the danger of leaving this in is that it becomes easier for the school to just say, oh, you're being bullied, so stay home. When in fact, the school should actually deal with bullying.
I would agree to the second part of your statement. I'm not sure that the fear is necessarily that it will be weaponized in quite that way.
Let it be weaponized, but it would make it easier.
It becomes, it definitely becomes it's an excused absence, right? So whether through the family's perspective or from the schools, it becomes, as Jamie was explaining, kind of potentially a default solution
Yes,
to
that's what I-
those
that's what I
situations.
meant.
Yeah, and that's not what we would
Yeah.
want to be. Yeah,
Want them to deal with their
yes, absolutely.
case of harassment. Okay, that's.
And in thinking about the practical implementation of something like this, there is a need. So there's another strategy being met, right, or being worked on right now at the agency around improvements for HHB prevention. And without going too far into the detail about that work, we are having conversations about how do we collect data related to HHB, how do we understand the impact of HHB and bullying, including missed time from school, classes, or other student activities. And so my expectation would be that we will see some data revision around this in the coming, hopefully year, if not certainly soon thereafter. But HHB prevention is a much larger thing to tackle right now. And our suggestion, right, would be to hold any specific HHB solutions or needs for part of a large, like more comprehensive strategy there. So in terms of the chronic absenteeism bill, we feel that the absences that would otherwise be met under that addition could be categorized under the other excused absences lines around physical and mental illness.
Then the second piece that relates to harassment, hazing, and bullying starts on page 6, line 9 through 11. I think we would recommend striking those lines as well.
So these are lines which speak to the addition of protocols, including in the model policy, the addition of protocols to respond effectively to bullying and harassment, acknowledging unique aspects of each case, including best practices for reentry into education spaces. So needing more in-depth support for reentry into education spaces is absolutely a primary need here. The attachment to the HHB issues, again, in thinking about larger strategy, HHB is defined and HHB prevention requirements are already defined under state statute in Title 16, Section 570 and forward. So we are actively engaged in thinking about revisions to model policies, particularly emphasizing and growing prevention strategies, much like we're talking about here for chronic absenteeism, but in specifically harassment, hazing, and bullying space. And we would recommend that we do not attach those two things together in the chronic absenteeism model policy, and instead, if needed, think about a more comprehensive HHB prevention update strategy, etc.
So I'm sitting here thinking, it's also such a factor.
It is, and I
Why
think
are we? So why are we taking it out?
it is such a factor that it is deserving of its own comprehensive approach. And so again, thinking about this bill being the keystone to a number of other improvements that need to be made around root causes. We have an arm of that, which is in HHB prevention, which we are deeply involved in right now. We've gone over the last year or so through a public engagement process on the existing prevention policy. We have come to the conclusion that it is not sufficient. And so we're working on how do we create meaningful change through that process as well. Along with that, we're revising our model procedure. So data collection, etc. It is its own specific subset of this work. Similarly, we've talked about things like improving student engagement, improving access to high quality instructors. Those are all different arms of this strategy that will take life in their own comprehensive ways, rather than creating this bill here, which, you know, by that thinking, chronic absenteeism is going to touch all of these things. So why would we include it here? Has the potential to snowball and become really, really difficult to manage.
I'd also add that, you know, the language of this, the policy shall include protocols to respond effectively to bullying and harassment. That is already called for in 16 DSA 570. So there is already a required model of policy procedures for prevention of harassment and bullying. So to have it here could be duplicative and sort of swallow the whole, like the prevention of chronic absenteeism doesn't necessarily need the entire weight of harassment, hazing, and bullying prevention as part of it. Now, re-entry into education spaces, that seems closer to this realm. If someone's had an extended absence, you're trying to figure out how to get them coming back. That would be in a policy like this, but the prevention of harassment, hazing, and bullying has got a whole set of tools already in existence that we're also working on.
Okay, I think our last section, and Jamie, you can help me find the line here.
There's two templates that are mentioned, and those are the same page, 6 lines 11 through 15. Template for documentation of actions taken according to the policy to address the absence, which shall constitute the truancy reporting protocol, and then the policy shall include a template for standard documentation to be provided to parents or guardians pursuant to section 1127 of this chapter.
And
So our
Okay.
Similar to our feedback to the other previous sections, we would suggest that this level of detail is most appropriate for model procedures or technical assistance rather than in policy. The nature of those templates is very likely to need to be updated responsively in consideration of different evolving needs and expectations around documentation, whether through the state's attorneys and sheriffs or through other partners, and through engagement by education administrators. So if we think about communication needs in certain parts of the state or our schools know our communities best and may need to adjust the way that they communicate to meet those needs best. If we were to embed specific templates to that level of detail in a model policy, it very much limits our collective ability to provide real-time revision in the future. We'd be going back through this process of policy revision rather than making responsive change. So
you're saying put in guidance
we
instead.
think it goes in guidance, yes.
Starting at policy. Where do you want to start? Stop.
Start at.
Or this.
13 or 14 is where you started.
Start at 11, this policy shall.
Oh, so right after.
For documentation, and then the policy shall also include. So the end of line 11 through the end of line.
Okay, so the other notable additions that were included in the latest iteration are the inclusion of guidance that emphasizes the importance of tailored responses to students struggling with safety and emotional issues. And also separately, the inclusion of a home study report due December 2026. We do not have any objections to these additions. We agree that they will strengthen this comprehensive strategy and our ability to make change here.
So the home studies, program come from you, or is that?
It would be a different team. So our team is, the Safe and Healthy Schools Division is leading the chronic absenteeism work. Home study would be managed by our education program approvals team. However, they have given me their full blessing to voice our support for that. Yeah.
But this section was a word from the committee, or
From the committee,
did it
yes.
come from? Okay.
There were conversations in various committee testimony and also reflected in some of the shareholder engagement that we did, that voiced some concerns for home study programs and the intersection of a home study program with truancy and thinking about, is this an exit strategy for a truancy situation? And so I think through the conversation, the topic of home study rose up with a lot of interest, and the solution has been that we need to find out more information before we can make any decisions. And so I think we are in agreement that study is feasible.
So in terms of, separate from the topic that you just described, but still in the home study program realm, do you have a position on putting back in the language that didn't survive the miscellaneous bill?
I do not. That would need to be probably a conversation with the secretary, but it's not part of our shop.
What did that do?
So there was a hearing process in the event that there were, Greta, please correct me if I'm wrong.
It's hearings after enrollment.
So
It'd be right where DCF could step in.
yeah, so we had a hearing process if there were issues with enrollment or absenteeism in a home study program. But that was inadvertently taken out when we made some sweeping changes to home study. And we attempted to put it back in the second year of the biennium with Campion. He was here. And then the miscellaneous bill died on the floor. I know it between Campion and Colin, but that's in the past. But either way, there was language that was crafted and brought back to life, or an attempt to bring it back to life by putting it back in the statute, but didn't go anywhere. And that, yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So they're asking to improve on oversight of home study programs to ensure home study participants compliant with attendance requirements. What's that really mean?
Part of the question we need to answer through a study, quite honestly. I think that's our current state. We collect attendance data for our public school systems only. So this bill also, even as written, is expanding that data requirement into our independent schools that receive public funding, which is different than we currently collect. we don't collect attendance data for home study programs in the same way. The mechanisms are very different. The tracking of that's very different. So we would I don't know that we'd be able to even hypothesize what that would look like right now without.
And is there been an issue that is driving that we need to do this study?
Again, I think it came up as a point of curiosity, and I think we had we heard there were a number of changes that were made to home study approvals in the last 8-ish years. Somewhere,
Not sure exactly.
home study is a different program managed with the agency, and so it has a different set of regulations. We heard discussion really through the entire process, right, from our early feedback through committee testimony, that there were concerns about whether enrollment in home study programs, because those programs are not managed in the same level of, we don't manage attendance for home study programs, if that was being utilized as a way to avoid absenteeism and truancy issues in a public school system, and that families were using it as kind of an off-ramp.
But my wife did homeschool years ago, but you got to provide curriculum. It's not an easy, just, hey, I'm going to homeschool, and you have to provide a lot of information. I would think that alone would deter anybody that if they're not happy at school, saying, hey, I'm just going to homeschool the kid. But it just, so it's not your department that drove.
It's not in our department, but there were, just so you're aware, there were a number of changes in 2023 that changed a lot of what is actually required upfront. So the level of information as required upfront from families changed, as well
It
as.
didn't decrease though. If anything, it increased. I suppose if we could get somebody in here from that.
So
Right.
a lot of it was taken out in terms of what people have to report.
Mhm.
And inadvertently, what was also taken out was the hearings after enrollment, in which if there was a concern that a child was enrolled in homeschooling, but they weren't actually getting any homeschooling, that a party could make the complaint that this homeschooling situation needs to be reexamined because there are concerns about whether they're actually getting educated.
But that's the difference from attendance. That's a difference. We can use it, but I don't mind. It just doesn't make sense that if you're checking attendance on a homeschool.
Right,
you're using it.
I may have misspoke, as there isn't attendance for homeschooling as far as I'm aware, but.
I think there are days in school, days of actively engaging curriculum, hours for different subjects. There should be.
Yeah, I believe you're right, but it says attendance requirements.
What else do we call?
Just a thought, what if we heard from Retta?
Yeah.
And put you on the spot.
I'm trying to be very quiet.
So why don't you chime in a little bit, identify yourself for the record.
My name is Retta Dunlap, and I'm a homeschool advocate with Vermont Home Educators of Vermont for 30 years now. So I've got some institutional knowledge in my head.
Why don't we actually just arrange for you to testify?
I think that's a good idea.
That's
Here. Anything else?
No, thank you. I think I'll just reiterate, for this particular bill, the inclusion of the home study report clause was introduced by committee to try to alleviate some of these questions, right? And really recognizing that if this bill prompted questions around attendance and home study programs, it is not a bill designed to update the home study approval requirements. And so that's where that parsing out happened.
Definitely.
Yes, so in summary, again, we appreciate the attention to this, and I'd like to reiterate that this feels like a solvable problem for Vermont. We have a lot of conversations around seemingly unsolvable challenges, and this is one of those places where we're seeing some very simple solutions to this work that are showing success in other parts of the country, as states are also seeing similar patterns of attendance issues post-pandemic. So we are connected through an existing contract with AOE with a set of national partners, nationally certified partners in this space who have been involved in the work. All of this is being informed by best practices that are seeing results. And what we are seeing through and through is that this work has to start with a consistent and clear set of definitions for chronic absenteeism. So and that is where we end, and I am available for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was helpful.
Thank you.
It's a good discussion. So, we are now shifting gears to our last witness of the day. Rebecca. Core Foundation.
Thank you. Very good. I feel like a kindergarten.
So, this is just, a little bit more work for our budget letter, a little bit more testimony towards the frame of our budget letter. And just to say it again, I'll make sure everything comes with us.
Comes where? Here,
Here.
like
with-
stays here with this.
With your.
I hope it's still here.
Yeah, it goes, they go, so, Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and inviting my testimony today. My name is Rebecca Covance, and I'm the Associate Director of the McClure Foundation. We are a 30-year affiliate of the Vermont Community Foundation that works to close the opportunity gap and strengthen rural communities by investing in purposeful pathways that lead to Vermont's promising jobs. Our work sits at the nexus of education, youth development, career pathways, and workforce development. At the McClure Foundation, compelled by the data that you know probably too well, Vermont's longtime status as having the lowest college continuation rates in New England, and its relatively new status as having the lowest high school completion rates in New England, and projections about high pay, high demand jobs. We have long funded good ideas and public-private partnerships when they have the potential to connect the dots between what Vermonters need and the future talent pipeline that Vermont employers need. The projects and ideas that we've helped test, design, and scale are some that you may know. And I'll just run through a few of them if that's okay. We helped pilot incarcerated education through CCB, which paved the way for federal funding to scale free courses and advising for inmates and Vermont's correctional officers. The McClure Foundation has partnered
Do we have this testimony in written form?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
across bipartisan administrations with the Vermont Department of Labor to create this Vermont's most promising jobs list, which I brought for you, like some. This serves as a really simple conversation starter about in-demand careers that offer good wages. We were a thought partner around the critical occupations framework the legislature adopted during COVID. Because teachers are the profession that makes all other careers possible, we invest in public teacher workforce development, including through early career on-ramps that start with flexible pathways like CTE and dual enrollment, innovative pathway to licensure, including new registered apprenticeship programs and a pilot to stipend to the unpaid full-time student teaching semester of students pursuing licensure through VTSU. And we offered a surprisingly successful graduation gift to the high school class of 2020, one free CCB course of a student's choosing. About 600 graduating seniors took us up on that offer, and it taught us a lot about the messaging effects of free and available to all. When we pair it with community college, our state's gateway institution. The lessons from that grad gift and a decade of supporting the equitable implementation of the flexible pathways statute led us to the current initiative that we support, an accelerated debt-free associate's degree pathway for high school students statewide. The free degree promise, which I brought us another cheat sheet if you'd like more information about this one. The free degree promise is an accelerated debt-free associate degree pathway that that builds on existing state and federal public policy to offer students who successfully complete the state's early college program at CCD the chance to persist at CCD and earn a debt-free, fast-tracked associate degree of their choosing. 4 years in, and the program's inspiring enrollment among youth furthest from opportunity. CCD has seen triple the number of low-income students accessing early college. This year's cohort is 50% low income, which is higher than their peer rate in the general K-12 population. Through the free degree promise, these students are persisting at CCD at triple the historic rates. And the free degree promise students are graduating at twice the rate and in half the time as their peers in community colleges nationally. Last spring, over 70 young people representing 13 Vermont counties, nearly half of whom were first-generation college students, earned their associate degrees an average of 1 year after high school graduation. I think that's pretty remarkable. 25% earned degrees in healthcare and behavioral science, 14% were in business, and 17% were in STEM, environmental science, and information technology. So this is the future workforce that all Vermont employers are hoping for. These are students like Aaron. And if you'd like to read, you can read. I brought a story about Aaron here, which is pretty great. I only brought one, I apologize. So Aaron is from White River Junction, who's now at BTSU Castleton as a junior, with the goal of becoming a high school art teacher. Kaylee from Fletcher, who's now at BTSU in pursuit of a registered nursing degree. Wyatt from East Fairfield, who earned his environmental science degree, and has the goal of working for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Colin from Virgins, who transferred into his junior year of a 4-year bachelor's degree in Burlington in information technology. And so we have countless examples just like these students across the state. And then I'm going to actually share one more story with you. For anyone who wants to read it, this is about a young man who was a free degree promise student from Williamstown, who has goal of becoming, owning his own HVAC business. I mean, these success stories are just like they abound, which is really lovely to share. So Chair Bongart's asked us to give a short background about who we are and what we fund. So I'm happy to take any questions about the free degree promise or any of our other programs. But what I actually came here today to talk about was an observation that has led to our one recommendation of this legislative session. A central premise of our investments at the Monclore Foundation is that career-connected public post-secondary education drives economic mobility. Our decision to partner with the VSD generally and the Community College of Vermont specifically over the years is highly strategic. They have been a cornerstone of our portfolio the last decade because they're consistently ready to serve, and they're where the greatest number of low-income students, low-income Vermonters enroll. In the past years, we've offered testimony with our thoughts on the need for a clearer strategic objective behind the roughly $120 million or so in annual funding in higher education. And because the Higher Education Trust Fund has become a topic of conversation this year, I want to note here that the Monclore Foundation has a long-standing view that the fund's statutory distribution structure stands to be modernized to reflect by name the places where low-income students are enrolling at scale, specifically the two Vermont State Colleges institutions, the Community College of Vermont and Vermont State University. This could be accomplished through a recommendation in your FY27 budget letter to change just a few words in statute. Currently, there are 3 beneficiaries are named in statute to receive the annual distribution in equal shares: the University of Vermont, the VSAC, and the Vermont State Colleges. The statute was created at a time when the Vermont State College system comprised 5 institutions. The consolidation of the state colleges creates a strategic opportunity to update the statute to better align with fund's intent. The statutory intent of fund is to support non-loan student aid. That's really key. Replacing the Vermont State Colleges with its 2 institutions named directly, thus creating a 4-way split structure, would more proportionally recognize the colleges that serve the largest number of low-income Vermonters. State projections indicate that this modernization of statute would result in a redirection of less than $250,000 per year in 26 and 27 from each of the affected beneficiaries. We would note that inspiring more enrollment into CCB also supports a stronger pipeline of transfer students to Vermont's four-year institutions. So of course, the fund is just one part of a really complex and large Vermont higher education public funding picture, but it matters because Vermont still has the lowest post-secondary continuation rate in New England. And in the aggregate and disaggregated by specific student populations who stand to benefit the most from education after high school. So clear public policy vision and goals are part of what's needed to change that condition. So we invite you to keep in touch with good ideas as we scale our grant making. In the coming years, we'll be looking to invest in, test, and scale the ideas that support more young Vermonters to graduate from high school or plans. And I thank you for your time today. We appreciate the leadership on some of the most thorniest issues facing Vermont. I don't envy you. And I really appreciate you considering updating the higher education statute.
Self-confessed, talking to all school funds, it's the first time I actually understood.
Yeah.
What we're doing here. What you're saying is that by working together the stakeholders in CCB, we're underfunding effectively CCB.
Well, CCB and me
In a
too.
way, both,
Yeah.
in a way, both,
Right.
because they're only getting one share. Even though they're very different, they should each be getting 1/4 of the.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
That is exactly what
That's
I'm for, because they support the greatest number
Greatest number.
of low income students.
Yeah.
And we believe they should have to be directly linked to reflect that in statute.
And that language is in that you give it to me once, but it's also in the.
Yes, I
specifically.
submitted it to
Okay.
Stephanie.
Okay. Any questions about that? And the numbers are in there as well, right?
I sent you this whole thing.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah,
Good, okay,
but feel free to call if you have any questions at all.
okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I should say, the promising jobs list is being updated now. It's gonna be,
I was gonna say, I was looking at some of the numbers, like, it's a lot higher for plumber now,
yeah.
a lot higher.
Well, we work with the Department of Labor to with the data, and we design it together. And so you should expect a new version out end of the year this year. So then around when it comes out. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, we got a meeting in 10 minutes. Yeah, so, let's just spend, yeah, we anticipated that not everybody would.
I got it somewhere. I just don't remember where.
So,
You need.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
so let's just spend just to set up more. Let's come back to the education reform transition because that relates to what we do in Finland. But have some of these numbers, right? The ones that colleges to locate some of these numbers. They have a pretty complete so. This language that we're talking about, I would might want to list of this first of this. But I can't remember now. Moving by future. Well, to people to look those up, the Vermont State College Moving by Futures in Advanced Vermont. I think Moving by the Futures was
Governor's.
recommend. That's what I'm.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. To support the governor's recommend.
Under Governor's Institute, is that,
No, it's not. That's different.
okay,
Governor's Institute is down below. And they're looking for 10% more than the governor's recommend. That's on the bottom of page 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
oh,
Yeah, we gotta figure out some of these numbers, but I see Building Bright Future stuff listed twice, by the way. Scratch it off on page 3. So
Can I ask a clarifying question of the context for how we're going to print this? Are we going to be listing these in order of this descending order of
yeah,
what our priority is without modifying what the underlying requests are? Like, we're not going to be saying, instead of a 3% increase, we recommend a 2% increase.
we theoretically could do that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we did that last year with one, as I recall, with one item suggested, yes, we want funding, but a little bit less than what they're asking for.
I think it's more specific to the committee, maybe helpful that way.
So do people, we don't have complete numbers here. Probably this is one. How do we want to start this? How do we want to get at this?
Well, you're the chair.
Yeah, well,
I usually need like a,
Yeah,
like a
numbers.
spreadsheet of this.
yeah,
Come back to
we gotta see if we can
Can we, like, ask Daphne perhaps to
track.
do a like a quick rough spreadsheet that's ugly and I'm not expecting much, but that we can look at.
I'll see if you can find these numbers.
Yes, everybody can look over the.
Okay, well, they weren't, I didn't put it, anyway. Okay, well, that's what we're up against, and I think we'll, in the next, by tomorrow, we can add in the language. From the Core Foundation that we just talked about, and this was certain, I think, I assume I wanted to have. Okay, that's where we are. And I think we've got everything in here except the Core Foundation for people we heard from one class. Okay. Okay. We're adjourned.